Okay, we are live.
All righty, welcome everybody to the Friday, January 24th afternoon meeting of the House Energy and Digital Infrastructure Committee. We'll go around the table and introduce ourselves, and then we'll let any guests in the room and our committee assistant introduce, and then we'll turn to you for the record. So I'm Representative Kathleen James from the Bennington 4 District.
Scott Campbell, Scott Campbell from St. Johnsbury, Caledonia, Essex District.
Richard Bailey from Memorial 2. Chris Morrow, Wyndham, Windsor, Bennington.
Michael Southworth, Caledonia 2.
Christopher Howland, Rutland 4.
Dara Torrey, Washington 2.
Graham Kleffner, Chittenden 13, Burlington.
Fantastic.
Jack Locker, Committee Assistant, Williston, Vermont.
Garth Dunkel, Webster. Jonathan Wolf, Primer, Piper, Addison, and Kramer on behalf of VEPSA and Burlington Electric.
Great. For the record,
Shanna Loisel with Vermont Electric Power Company, or VELCO. Thank you for having me today. I think I'm gonna ask Jack to share my slides since I'm having difficulties connecting to the Zoom.
great.
Thank you for your assistance, Jack. Just give me one moment here. Okay. Is it okay to start?
Yeah.
Great. Vermont Electric Power Company. We are the transmission utility in the state of Vermont. I know you've heard from all of the distribution utilities today, and ISO New England was here this week. So this will be another piece of the puzzle, so to speak. Today, I plan on giving a high-level overview of who VELCO is, what it is we do, what makes us unique, what sets us apart from the distribution utilities and ISO New England. And then I have a few slides to talk about some of our current work that's underway, projects that we have going on, and projects we hope to start in the future. To begin, I'll just a brief bio on myself. I born and raised in Vermont in Rutland County. Have been at VELCO for the past 15 years. It's been a really incredible experience to see the energy transition begin from those early 2000s and to watch that transformation over the past 15 years. So I hope I bring a wealth of knowledge to you today, but anything that I don't know, I'll be happy to say I don't know. But we have an incredible team back at the office, and they would be happy to help me circle back with you to get the answers if I don't know them today. About VELCO, we are Rutland based. We have about 180 employees and still growing. A third of our workforce has retired in the past 5 to 7 years. So we have about a third of our workforce is brand new people. When I walk into the office, I always say, for many years, I knew everybody by their first names and probably all of their family's names. And so now it's just getting to know a whole host of new colleagues. And so, with an evolving grid comes some evolving needs. So a lot of that workforce are really highly technical skilled new hires. So our IT team, our telecom team, our technology team in totality. So as our transmission grid continues to evolve, we're seeing new emerging reliability standards that we are required to meet. We're seeing new state policy goals that we need to understand and then draw into our planning assumptions when we look out into the future, what we need for the transmission grid. And our grid behavior is changing. It looks a little bit different than it did 10 years ago in terms of what we see from the control center. So it's a much more dynamic system. It requires us to really look outside the box and find innovative solutions so that we can meet our energy needs for today and into the future. So for background, Velco, we are the statewide transmission utility. We were actually created in 1956 to bring hydropower from the St. Lawrence to Vermont. So the distribution utilities at the time banded together to create this entity solely for delivering high voltage electric to bring hydropower to Vermont. Our ownership structure is unique in that we're actually owned by the 17 distribution utilities that you heard from today. They are our customers and also our owners on the same side. In addition to the DUs, we're also owned by a public benefits corporation. That's the Vermont Low Income Trust for Electricity, or VLIT. It's a very unique governance structure that allows Velco to be able to pass real value onto Vermont ratepayers. So Velco doesn't have any retail customers. Our sole ownership is of the transmission assets. And so when Velco is able to make a profit above our expenses, it's required to go back to the distribution utilities. The distribution utilities are required to put that towards reducing their revenue requirement, which essentially reduces ratepayer bills. So we are set up like a cooperative. We are a for-profit, but we're set up like a cooperative so that any of the value that we receive, as I said, above our operating expenses, it goes back to every grid connected customer. So anytime we can create real value through our work, that's a plus for Vermont distribution utilities, Vermont ratepayers, and New England, because we are part of the New England grid. So because of that financial model, we are a bit different from the other transmission owners really across the country, and especially in New England. Transmission owners typically have, shareholders that they're responding to. Our shareholders are the distribution utilities and therefore customers. So that's a really great thing for Vermont. A few things that are around just our managed assets. It just kind of gives you an idea. We do have 740 miles of transmission lines, 14,000 acres of rights-of-way that our rights-of-way department and vegetation management department are managing on an annual basis. We have roughly 55 substations that include switching stations and terminal facilities. Fun fact, our fiber optic network that is attached to our transmission system is double the amount of transmission lines. We have about 1,600 miles of fiber optic lines throughout our transmission system. That fiber, it's a private network, one that Velco proposed to build in the late 2000s. It was essentially so that we could have direct two-way communication with all of our facilities, having information come from our substations when there's something maybe going wrong or there's data from the substation. Now, rather than sending someone out to the substation to get that information, we can communicate with that substation on a two-way street. This is a little bit of foresight for Velco to do that as early as they did, and a lot of people in the industry, later on are catching up, and fiber is a really important piece for electrification in terms of having that real-time data as we electrify everything.
How does that, so you said it was a private network and it's allowing Velco to rapidly communicate back and forth from all of your substations. How does it aid Vermonters' high-speed access?
Yeah, so great question. A few things about the fiber optic network. Velco, the value of that network is helping Vermont distribution utilities, Velco. We also co-share to help with some of the sheriff departments for their communication, or I'm sorry, I'm mixing that up with our statewide radios, excuse me. For the communication union districts, though, we are helping to basically make it more efficient for them to spread their fiber out by enabling them to, I think it's called lashing onto our poles.
Yeah.
And also where we're able to be the middle mile for those communication union districts, we're able to backhaul them to different places that might be far away from where their regions are.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
that's helpful. I figured it probably had something to do with the CUDs, but I wasn't sure. Okay.
And in addition to that 1,600-mile network, we're also adding, there's our fiber reliability project that is currently underway right now, where we're adding additional fiber onto the system. And it's essentially going further into the system. We have fiber on our transmission network, and now we're starting to reach out to connect to those distributed energy resources, which are really important to have visibility from our grid operator perspective. We don't really see what's happening on the distribution utility level. We just see it from an aggregate level from the transmission perspective. So having fiber connected to distributed energy resources will enable greater visibility onto the grid as we're going through this transformation.
Just a clarification, so distributed energy resources means major solar fields or?
Yeah, I think that the definitions, distributed generation has changed to distributed energy resources to encompass more than just PV solar storage.
Storage.
I think it encompasses all of it.
But is it larger scale or is it, okay. What do you mean by that? By this?
It certainly not connecting to
Individual
net metering system. So bigger. I don't have the exact megawatts.
But basically, larger solar fields, wind farms, utility scales, battery storage, that sort of thing.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
So in addition to our fiber optic network, we also have a statewide radio network. This includes 56 statewide radio towers across Vermont that enables Velco and other first responders to be able to communicate together, because we all know in Vermont there are a lot of places where you don't get service, and we really needed a reliable telecommunication program so that our first responders could be communicating together, whether it was for just daily maintenance or particularly during emergencies. So that's a really valuable asset to Velco, and that's the part where we were able to co-locate with some of the sheriff departments so that they could utilize those towers. We also have high voltage direct current equipment that enables us to interconnect to Canada and Hydro-Quebec. That facility is our Highgate converter that's based in Highgate, Vermont. It's a really important facility for us where it's essentially bringing power in from Canada, converting it to DC, converting it back to AC so that it can go onto the US system, and vice versa when we're exporting to Canada. We are in more than 170 communities, 72 communities that are served by Velco's middle mile fiber. And then we're also in total 193 Vermont towns that host Velco facilities. And with our facilities being there, we're essentially one of the largest property taxpayers in Vermont. I think this past year, 2024, was at $31.8 million in property taxes. I think we can move on to the next slide. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. I do want to just talk a moment about this map, because it's really the only map I have included here for our system. So Velco, we are essentially the backbone for the grid. And you can see from this very simplified map of our footprint, which illustrates where our transmission lines are. And our transmission lines consist of everything 115,000 kilovolts and above. Anything below 115,000 kilovolts would be part of the sub-transmission system or the distribution system. Those are three separate systems, but they all are interconnected, and we have to work together.
Could you go back to the real basics and talk about volts? Volts. I'm just talking about like just super basically.
Sure. The engineers that might listen to my response are probably going to be
I don't
knocking
think
their
so.
head
I
on the
think you can
table.
keep it so basic. Yeah.
So kilovolts is basically the measurement of the amount of electricity that is going through our lines. So when we talk about capacity, it's what the line can push through.
Okay.
When we talk about voltage, it's the actual amount of electric.
Coming out.
Yes,
But that's good enough for me.
okay.
Thank you.
Very rudimentary.
That's fine.
And so our system, you'll see, and we call it in our slang 115 kV. We also have 345 kV or 345,000 kilovolts on our system, as well as 230. And we also have a direct current line that I can't use my mouse, but it's in the Northeast Kingdom. It's the line that, yep, right, keep going, right there. So that's a direct current line that is actually owned by a whole host of New England transmission owners, but it goes through Vermont. And so Avelco is the manager of that section of the line.
Okay.
I'll ask Chris a question if I
Yeah.
could. So you mentioned transmission, sub-transmission, and distribution. Sub-transmission is, how would you define that?
Below the transmission.
Excellent.
That's a good answer.
Good.
So I want an engineer to
Okay.
give a better definition
Okay.
for that.
Okay.
But there's a level that's below transmission that is able to interconnect with the distribution system. So, and not all the utilities have sub-transmission. I think it's only Green Mountain Power and Vermont Electric Cooperative that actually manage
I was
sub-transmission.
going to ask that before, but we were kind of right for time.
Right.
Okay, well, we'll find out more about that. Now,
Okay.
distribution, do you know what the distribution, voltage typically is?
That would be a great
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
There,
Oh yes, we have a CVPS engineer in the room.
so, the sub-transmission is generally 69 or 46 kV. And that just takes it to, so voltage is, figure that as the, ability for water to flow. That's the pressure, okay? The volume of water is the current.
Right.
Okay, the amps. So the typical distribution voltages are 34.5 kV and 12.5. And then Green Mountain Power announced that they are retiring all the old 4,000 kV lead transmission that, or the distribution voltage that was our parents' age. So this has grown over the years. So it's the voltage times the current equals the total power. But and predominant voltage is then 12.5 three-phase.
For distribution.
Correct. Until you're home, it's 7.2, the single wire steps down to typically 120, 240.
Yeah.
For
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you. Can I throw any other engineering questions your way?
if need be, that was Christopher Howland, but
Thank you. One other thing that I would point out with this map is there are those arrows at the end of where Vermont's boundaries are. Those are what we would call our interconnection points or our ties to the other parts of the grid and region. Ties are really important to us as it connects us to the regional grid and it allows for that transfer of electrons from grid to grid. That'll be important as we get further into the slides. So Vermont, it's part of the New England grid, part of ISO New England's regional grid that includes Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. So we're connected in that electrical sense, but we're also connected in the monetary sense in that Vermont makes up 4% of the New England regional load. And so that's important to remember, because when it comes to socializing transmission costs, if a Vermont project is beneficial to Vermont and the region, Vermont pays 4% of that transmission project, and the rest of the region pays the other 96%. The ratio also works the other way, though. So there are other transmission upgrades that are happening in other states in the region that are beneficial to all of the states. And so thus they are socialized. The cost of those transmission projects are socialized. So when that happens, Vermont has to pay their share of the load. Okay, next slide. So this slide is just to give you a sense. This is a franchise map to show you the distribution utilities where their territories exist. Right now, you only see the overlay of the transmission lines on there. Those are those black lines. If the distribution system was overlaid there too, you would see hundreds and hundreds more miles, thousands of miles of lines on that map. Green Mountain Power is our largest utility in Vermont. You can see that in the green, they probably take up 75% of the state. And with Vermont Electric Cooperative being the second largest in that northern tier portion of Vermont. And the rest of those utilities are kind of color coded throughout the state. And there's a whole list of here, and it shows you kind of, I might need to update these numbers, but yes.
So just to state the obvious, or I think it's obvious, the Velco's lines are like the backbone of the system. We've got the power flowing through there in a very central way. And then each distribution utility owns and manages all of its little fingers coming off into its territory.
Right. So from a kind of nuts and bolts perspective, we're transmitting high voltage power on our transmission lines. It goes to a substation facility.
Right.
It gets stepped down to a distribution level through transformers. There are some substations that we share with other utilities. They essentially are picking it up from that point and carrying it onto their system.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, the next slide, just a bit about Velco's vision. Our vision is to create a sustainable Vermont through our people, assets, relationships, and operating model. That cooperative-like structure is what helps enhance that vision. Our role is to ensure transmission system reliability by planning, constructing, and maintaining the state's high voltage electric grid. Some related responsibilities beyond our main role of ensuring reliability through the planning and constructing. Velco also serves as the local control center for Vermont's grid operations. So our grid operators are running the transmission system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They are in the control room monitoring and responding to changes in the grid. Essentially, maybe you'll double check me here, but we run on 60 hertz of where we need to balance the load and the generation. And it's keeping that 60 hertz in harmony. And our control operators have all of the monitoring equipment to be able to make those adjustments where it's needed. We also take direction from ISO New England. When ISO New England asks us to do something on the grid, we're taking instruction from them as well. They're looking at it from the bulk electric perspective, so the entire region. Velco is more focused just in the state of Vermont. We also serve as Vermont's metering and power contract settlement agent. So what that means is we have a power accounting team, and they are taking the daily metering for the entire state of Vermont. All the distribution utilities are essentially providing the power accounting team their metering information in aggregate, and we submit that to ISO New England for the entire state. There's a lot more that they do, but that's essentially, they are the settlement agent for the state. We also are we advocate owner and state positions at ISO New England. ISO New England, when they were here, may have talked about the Northeast Power Pool or the MPCC. This is a regional where there are a number of stakeholders, from generators to end users to efficiency utilities. Transmission owners are one of them, and a lot of that they're talking about broad themes. One of the things that Belco has been really purposefully showing up to those meetings with is this idea around affordability. If we were to look at every year, there's a regional network service rate that is provided, and it's increasing every year for the region. But we feel the effects of that when we have to pay a certain price, which means Vermont has to pay a certain price. And before, it used to be reliability projects where you build a capital project, building a line. We're seeing less of that and more of these asset condition-based projects. So our grid was built in the late 50s, early 60s. A lot of that equipment is starting to age and needs replacement. And that's the same for the rest of the region. But we just want to make sure that there is questions are the right questions are being asked at a regional level of these costs are exorbitant in terms of, over $1 billion will need to be spent over the next several years to upgrade the transmission grid. And so we just want to make sure that it's the right upgrades are happening and that these are no regret investments, so to speak. In addition to that, we have here our long-range transmission plan. So Belco's core work is making sure that the grid stays reliable, that the lights stay on, that we're able to deliver affordable, safe, and reliable power to the distribution utilities. And one of the ways that we do that is through our long-range planning process. The purpose of that process, essentially, we publish a Vermont long-range transmission plan. We do this every 3 years. I brought copies for everyone for some, as I always say, late Friday night reading. But it really is, if you want a primer on the electric industry and how Vermont fits into it in the region, this is a really incredible document to have. A lot of hard work goes into it. So I brought copies for everyone. We also have it available online if you prefer to do it that way, read it that way. So the purpose of the plan is to identify reliability deficiencies in the 20-year horizon. And in order to begin a discussion on the best solution to meet the need, we need to understand where those deficiencies are. So we do that through the long-range transmission planning process. Yes.
Just a quick question, just a logistical thing. If you could make sure that our committee assistant has a link, unless it's already published with your testimony today.
I should have made it linkable in here, but I will send a link.
Yeah, let's make sure that we can put the long range transmission plan in your folder.
Absolutely.
Great.
That would be wonderful. This plan is the first plan since 2015 where load growth related issues are identified in the first 10 years. We haven't seen that since really 2015. There were a lot of load growth related projects that we had to consider. But then load growth was essentially flat or declining in some areas. Now that takeaway is all built on assumptions that go into our planning effort. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But one key assumption that we decided to use as we were starting our planning models was that the electric vehicles that we saw coming online and that were projected to continue to come online over the next 20 years, we assumed that there would be no flexible load management. There wouldn't be a management system for the EV charging. We did that. Not that that's true, because the distribution utilities are doing incredible work with their programs, flexible load management programs for EV charging. Oh, yeah.
I am now following you on flexible load management for EV charging.
in that, maybe I should describe it. Okay. Thank you. So flexible load management, this is a term, it's kind of the 2020 term of when you have load, and we know that we have some significant electrification happening over the next 10 and 20 years. This is all policy based. These are our clean energy goals, our climate goals, that we want to shift to more electrified transportation sector and the thermal sector. So driving electric cars and heating with heat pumps. That produces a very large load to manage. Velco's transmission system, we're basically a 1,000 megawatt capacity transmission system. So when we see projections of load going over 1,000 megawatts, that would require a transmission solution to be able to meet that need. But Vermont's kind of special in that we're not allowed to just build that transmission solution because there is load growth. We're really unique in this process, which is here managing the Vermont System Planning Committee, in that we are required as a state to look at non-transmission alternatives and to give the full, fair, and timely consideration of what non-transmission solutions would look like. If those solutions are more cost effective than a transmission solution, then we would choose that non-transmission solution. Flexible load management could be considered a non-transmission alternative because you would essentially be building out programs to shift load to different parts of the day or evening. So a great example, what we're seeing here on the grid is with electric vehicles, people are driving to work. Maybe they have electric vehicle chargers at work. Maybe they don't. They're coming back home, probably plugging in around 5 or 6 o'clock at night. That's also the time of night where we're seeing, big peak loads at certain times of year. And so from a consumer perspective, from distribution utilities, if there's a way to find programs where I don't have to charge my car at 5 or 6 o'clock at night, I'm not leaving and I could wait until tomorrow morning. And so it's shifting flexible load, making that load a little bit more flexible. I'm sure the other utilities could do a better job of explaining that, but that's an example of a flexible load management program, right? Yes.
So it's a program,
Yeah.
it's a program to incentivize ratepayers or users
Yeah.
To use at a different time.
Correct. And that might be through like a time of use rate. And I'm sure that, each utility has their own program specific to what works best for their customers.
Right. If I'm understanding from other people that testified, they gave us information that they can actually control when that's going to charge the vehicle, correct?
Yeah, that through a agreement
Correct.
with the end user, the customer.
Yep.
Yeah, and I believe there's always the override option. If you really need to charge your car, you certainly have that advantage to do that.
Right.
So I have this. It's my house.
It's
With GMP, so they'll just send me a text saying, peak load this time, we're not going to charge unless you override. I get a free charger and a lower rate in order to give them the flexibility to manage my load. And it seems to work seamlessly.
my experience with override was I unplugged it and plugged it back in. So, right.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. I've heard that as a
Well, just saying, yeah. It's not an onerous security process. I unplugged the car and overrode by plugging it back in.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
So I'll get into the Vermont System Planning Committee in just a few slides, but the next slide, this is, I love to call the frying pan slide. This is to show you how our regulatory structure looks. So Velco is federally regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. FERC essentially sets the rules. They set the return on investment for transmission owners. They are our federal regulator. They work in tandem with the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, or NERC. NERC is the one that's really developing and enforcing reliability standards. And Velco has a very direct relationship with NERC. We are connected at the hip in terms of reliability standards and how we are required to operate our system. The Northeast Power Coordinating Council, the MPCC, they are the ones that are establishing and monitoring and enforcing region-specific reliability requirements. And then you have ISO New England, who oversees the planning and operations of the whole New England electric grid. They also have another arm that's focused on wholesale markets, but in terms of today's presentation, I'm just focusing on the planning and reliability aspect. Then the state of Vermont, the Vermont Public Utility Commission and the Department of Public Service, those are both regulatory bodies that have oversight over particularly Velco when we are doing any work in the state. So we have to file what's under the statute, it's Section 248. So that is the framework in that we operate with proposing projects, the siting of projects, and getting approval through the state regulatory process. And then Velco, and then you see the Vermont distribution utilities within those frying pans. Okay, and the next slide. So this slide talks about the Vermont System Planning Committee, and I don't know if you've heard that term in here yet or not. But essentially, the committee is a statewide stakeholder group that was established to address grid reliability issues that were specific to load growth related issues on the transmission system. This was essentially an outgrowth of a Velco project in the early 2000s. It was called the Northwest Reliability Project. It was a 63-mile upgrade on our system. It was the first major project undertaken in Vermont on the transmission system in 30 years. The transmission system was built out in, as I said, the 50s, 60s, essentially a maintenance company for 30 years. You might remember the 2003 blackout, a Northeast blackout. That was all caused by a tree touching a transmission line in Ohio. That turned into a cascading outage that swept the basically Atlantic seaboard off the grid. And they went dark for a few days. It was a very significant event. Vermont was spared because our grid operators, through those interconnections, cut the interconnection off so that we could maintain our system in Vermont and New England. But our neighbors to the west were not as lucky. There were fatalities. It was not a good situation for that time period in 2000. The ramifications of that meant NERC, FERC and NERC, producing very stringent reliability standards, planning standards to ensure that that type of a cascading outage, blackout, would not happen again. Essentially, those standards came to our door where we had to start putting different planning assumptions, which our planning engineers would call, okay, you need to be able to plan for your first outage and make sure that your system is redundant enough that you can continue to serve power on the transmission level. But now you have to also plan for a second outage at the same time. And what that meant was, and we call that N-1 or N-1-1. And essentially, we had to start building out a more robust system to be able to meet those reliability standards that we were required to meet. That is how the Northwest Reliability Project came about, where we in our planning models, we needed to rebuild this line at a higher capacity. So in granting its permit to us, the Public Utility Commission concluded that the line was needed but that with earlier planning, the reliability problems in question might have been better addressed, or at least less costly addressed, with non-transmission solutions. This was not a popular project. This was a very large transmission going from our West Rutland substation all the way up that Route 7 corridor to our Queen City substation. These big, the transmission lines are the 2 poles with the X brace in the middle with the 3 phases. So they're hard to miss when they're near the roads. It was a long process, regulatory process, proceeding that took 2 weeks of hearings with a lot of people contesting the project. But essentially, it was a need for the grid, and they needed to give us the permit, which they did. But at the same time, they opened a investigation into how better to manage looking out in the future for transmission reliability deficiencies and finding better solutions for them. That's where the VSPC comes in. It was established under the docket 7081 proceeding that was open, creating that planning process that would ensure, as it says here, the full, fair, and timely consideration of cost-effective non-transmission alternatives. The legislature also enacted changes to Vermont law that would require VELCO to produce a long-range transmission plan and update it every 3 years. We've been doing that since 2009. This is a really important stakeholder group. This little pie chart kind of showcases the members within the VSPC. So you have VELCO, you have all of your distribution utilities, you have your regulators, and then you also have supply and demand resources. So your energy efficiency utilities, supply resources like renewable generation developers. And then the Public Utility Commission appoints 4 public members representing different interests for environmental interests, residential, commercial, and regional planning. And so in addition to that, it's interesting, energy is a hot topic these days because of this transformation we're in. And it's been really interesting seeing the growth of the VSPC just in terms of interest in what's happening at these meetings, which are essentially where, grid engineers and grid policy people come together and have the really important conversations about how do we make it all work. And so when I first started attending these meetings, it was probably just the people that were required to be there. And now our meetings are open to the public. They've always been open to the public, but now we're seeing much higher volume of participation, which is great because it's really important to be taking a look at the transmission reliability, what we need, and also how do we do this cost effectively.
Yeah.
I lost track of the load management discussion when we were explaining it. So why would you not factor that into your 20-year plan? Or did I misunderstand what you were saying?
Sure. Yes. I guess I never finished the thought. So let me get into that when I think the next slide I'll get into that. But just so I think from this perspective, this is just showcasing what the VSPC is and what it does. The VSPC helps develop a load forecast for us to do our planning studies, and then we take that away. We do the analysis. We draft a long-range transmission plan. We give it back to the VSPC to review, provide input. We take comprehensive input. We make changes as needed, and then it goes through a public outreach process, 2 months where we're meeting with regional planning commissions, hosting public meetings, primarily where their deficiencies are being cited, so that we're not surprising anyone with transmission projects should they come about as the most cost-effective solution. On the next slide, though, there's a lot more information about this long-range transmission plan, and I will take the opportunity when you can come to VELCO and really sit down and walk through what that analysis looks like. For today, for brevity, I was just high-level key takeaways from our long-range transmission plan. We know that Vermont will continue to depend on transmission. Our peak load hour is after dark. Solar PV and distributed generation has done an amazing job at making our daytime load so low to the point where we're actually seeing in certain times of year that we're exporting back to Canada. That hasn't happened since Vermont Yankees was in service. We are importing 100% of the time to meet Vermont's load, peak load. But during the day, when it's really sunny or windy, our in-state distributed generation has made a meaningful impact on how we use energy. So Vermont's imports on our power. So I noted about the exporting to Canada. That happened about 5 times in 2 weeks during that shoulder season in May. Which is a really good indicator that the system is evolving. And, we don't see this in the summer and winter, but we are going to continue to rely on the transmission system when those peak loads in summer and winter hit us.
Curiosity question, why would we sell it to Canada instead of into the domestic spot market? Just because of the way the lines work?
Oh, well, we're not selling power. Velco isn't selling the power. I mean, it's a little bit like electrons are flowing. And so it's just more of the physics of the system. We're a north-south system. So if there's a lot of electrons on that northern section, which there is a lot of distributed generation in the northern section of Vermont, just from a physical perspective, it's going to go north.
Thank you.
Yeah. But to that point, though, solar at this point, because it's now shifted our peak, it's not serving our peak load, and so we are either importing or, we're importing to meet that load at that point. So the long range transmission plan we developed 2 scenarios, and our first scenario is the high scenario. If we call it our Vermont roadmap, that's essentially if we are going to meet all of our state policy goals with electrification, we had to get what that peak load would look like in 10 and 20 years. Then we produced a scenario that, maybe we don't meet those goals and we continue at the adoption that we're seeing today. And so we made 2 scenarios to kind of get a range of what we would need to be prepared for. Because from a transmission perspective, we are required to meet the load, whatever it is, which is why we plan for what the worst case scenario would be. Because if it were ever to come to fruition, we would be required to meet that load. And if we don't meet it, there are very expensive financial penalties for transmission owners not meeting that. Now, to your question around flexible load management, why didn't we include it? Flexible load management programs, they are maturing, but we don't have the assured data that we know 100% of EVs could be controlled at peak load. So in our 2021 plan, we did assume that electric vehicles would be able to be managed. And our 2021 plan did not have any reliability deficiencies. But we really felt like our planners, they want the most accurate data to be able to produce their plans. And so they felt like it was really important in this plan to remove the assumption. If we don't have the data to say that it can happen, we need to remove it from our planning assumption so that we can find a baseline, have an understanding of what we would have to be prepared for just in case. And so that's why the flexible load management programs, particularly for EVs, were not included in this planning. Does that answer your question?
You do one scenario or multiple scenarios?
We don't in either scenario in this 2024 plan.
But I'm sorry, I misphrased that. So how many scenarios are you presenting in this?
2.
2.
A high load, which is about Vermont getting to 1,600 megawatts by 2043, and then a kind of continued growth. Which, sorry, I don't have it
That's right. Well,
ingrained, but it's lower. Let's put it that way. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, Victoria.
I think I recorded this correctly, but when ISO New England was here, and they told us about their 10-year plan, I think she mentioned transportation electrification forecasting that does include managed.
Yeah, so ISO does their own planning for their studies.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And we look at those, particularly they recently did a Vermont needs assessment, which was the first time they only looked at just Vermont. We're normally grouped with New Hampshire, but because of the amount of distributed generation in Vermont, they really felt it was important for them from a reliability standpoint to understand just how Vermont's system was going to work. So through their planning models and the studies and they have incredible studies that have come out too. I'm sure she talked about their 2050 transmission study that was looking at how are we going to do this? What will a fully electrified renewable grid look like in 2050? And where will the deficiencies be? Where will we need to strengthen or reinforce our system? 4 areas were identified. One of them was Northwest Vermont. That's a really important, data point for us. I mean, we see it certainly, but that's making our interconnection at Highgate. We also have an interconnection that goes under Lake Champlain. Those are really critical tie points for us. And I will make Hans happy by saying, planners, they always want stronger interconnections because that makes for a more reliable grid. Hans Presame is our lead transmission planner, and would love to have a chance for you all to meet him and have him talk about the work that him and his team did. Okay, so significant distributed generation growth in the same historical pattern will exceed system capacity. So what that means is, for us, the location of distributed generation really matters. There are places where the transmission system can host more in-state generation. And there are places on the transmission system where we have essentially reached our hosting capacity on the grid. And
This is an incoming energy. Sorry.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that means it's really important for us to, when we're siting, from Belco's perspective, we're really encouraging siting of more in-state distributed generation to be aligned with the transmission capacity. Because if it's not, it will require upgrades that in some cases can be costly. And when it's for generation, it's you think about it, serving peak load and serving generation needs are 2 totally different things. We're more focused on serving peak load, and that's how we operate as a region where those costs are socialized. If you're serving a generation constraint that's localized, that's not going to be funded throughout the region. That would be a very Vermont-specific cost. So that's why often you're not seeing transmission projects getting built to meet generation needs. But some good news is that in this plan, you're going to see a very rudimentary static map that shows what the capacity of the transmission system is. It's color-coded. Red means we've reached our limit. Orange, we're almost there. Green, open for business. And as you might expect, the top portion of Vermont is color-coded red, and the southern portion of Vermont is more green. That has been helpful to at least get the point across as we talk about the transmission system capacity. But I'm really excited to be able to introduce a more dynamic, interactive map that we've been working on through a federal requirement that we'll be putting on our website, open to the publicly available, to basically visualize where the capacity is and allow developers to better understand how their projects may or may not impact the transmission system. So on this interactive map, you can put an injection of, I want to build a 100 megawatt solar farm, and I'm going to put that into this model. I'm going to click OK, and then the model produces where the transmission system can accommodate that, where it starts to identify, and then it identifies the deficiencies. So if you were to build in this location that has not enough capacity, not only are you going to see that it's red, but now you're going to see the 3 or 4 transformers or lines that are exceeding because of that injection. And so it's a more dynamic way to be able to work with people who are trying to interconnect onto the system. It's not available yet, but it will be, and I'd be happy to share that link when it is available.
Great.
Exciting.
Sure,
I just wondered, we met the PUC recently and learned about the certificate of public good and their role in citing.
Right.
Is that a tool they would use in issuing CPG?
Possibly. So they are the Public Utility Commission is the one that we submit the long range transmission plan to. So they are well aware of the constraints. And this will just be a new tool to be able to utilize.
So you have storage up there. If you're going to talk about this, then.
Sure.
But my question is about using storage to take that excess load off the transmission lines.
Yeah.
Do you guys do any storage, or you're just the lines?
We don't do storage at this point. It's the capability really isn't there for us because we don't own generation, and batteries are kind of in this other category of are they generation, are they load? And so we don't own any storage. There may come a point when regional rules allow for storage to be a transmission only asset, which would be able to help when we have a transmission issue where we can run that storage facility for a certain amount of time. But it's the ducks aren't lined up yet for that to be enabled. So, but for right now, no, we don't own any storage. But storage from our perspective, it's the same with storage as it is for distributed generation. Location is really important because you could site storage in a place that would actually be detrimental to the system because of the physics and the way that the power flows.
How do you mean it would just sort of lose? Could you explain that?
I wish I could go further
That's okay.
into
Sorry. So for the distributed generation and for storage, siting is very important.
Correct.
This is what I've taken away and lodged.
That's
Thank
excellent. My
Great.
job is done. No, I'm joking. But this next point around collaboration and innovation are needed to achieve these renewable energy goals. To be able to do what we need to do, it's going to be a whole package solution. There will not be one solution deal to be able to get to 2050 and meet our renewable and climate goals. And so it is going to take the flexible load management programs. It's going to take storage. We will need grid upgrades. We try really hard not to build transmission, and we've done a really good job of that for the past 15 years. But there needs to be also, on the other hand, transmission is a very important and effective investment to be able to meet our needs at a affordable way.
In terms of adding more transmission capacity, what's the balance between putting in new poles and just reconductoring?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we actually, when I get to the next slide, it'll be a perfect example of what we're calling right sizing projects. Do we build a new line, or can we just take our existing infrastructure and make it fit our needs? But there certainly is a balance, but I think it's leaning more towards optimizing what you have. And but on the other hand, it's aging infrastructure. We used a lot of wooden poles to build our system, and after 60 years, woodpeckers really like our transmission poles, and insects, and just the drying of that wood doesn't always make it reliable and would require, a kind of a rebuild, so to speak. And lastly, I just curtailment, which, no one wants to be curtailed, but it is a solution that could help when we're dealing with constraints, particularly generation constraints. And it is a solution that is utilized by ISO New England, particularly in Vermont, when there's too much generation that's booming in Vermont, in areas where the transmission system isn't big enough to get it out. It will essentially ask those generators to shut down or do not exceed a certain limit. So, big takeaway on this last piece is non-transmission alternative process is underway. We now have a plan that identifies reliability deficiencies. As part of that docket 7081 VSPC process, we are now required to look at all of the solutions, the costs of those solutions, and weigh them between transmission versus non-transmission. So that's happening right now. The utilities are really taking the lead on that, and Velco's playing a supporting role. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide, which will kind of hit on this piece about optimizing our existing transmission system. So we know there's going to be costs that are associated to meet the needs of our evolving grid, both from a local and regional perspective. And Vermont's not alone in this work. We expect to see those increased regional costs from across New England, and we are seeing them on the projected forecasts. But that's really why our team is focused on how we can get the most out of the system that we currently have. And mitigating some of those costs. So one way that we're doing that, and I just want to mention this project, there's a term called grid enhancing technologies. And although they're not considered an NTA yet, non-transmission alternative, and it's really just about the financing of them, how you get the return on investment for them. But I think utilities, transmission owners are seeing their value. They come in the form of dynamic line ratings, having basically sensors like mini boom boxes on your transmission line that are monitoring the temperature and sending that back to the grid operator. Because when you're at full capacity, you're going to have a really hot line, but maybe you're not at full capacity. And those types of dynamic line rating equipment can help an operator or an engineer decide if it's being underutilized in that moment. The other type of grid enhancing technology that Velco has been focused on are what we call power flow control devices. We have been partnering with a research facility. They are called EPRI, and that's the Electric
Power Research
Institute. Thank you. We've partnered with them on siting a smart valve in Vermont in that northwest section of our transmission system. And basically, it's a control device that enables us to access trapped wind in upstate New York. But it basically allows us to let it in when we need it and to close the door when it's not going to help our grid. It would, actually cause some issues. This is a really exciting project because we put it through a DOE grant process and received $18 million from the DOE. EPRI received it, but Velco's partnering with them on that project. And we've earned regional support for this device. We haven't gotten the full approval, but I mention that because it's the region, ISO New England, and all the NEPOOL stakeholders see this piece of equipment as something that is going to help the entire region.
And then they pay for it.
Well, out of the, a $47 million project, 18 million being funded by the DOE, and then the rest, what's left over, would be socialized throughout New England.
And
We paid 4%.
4% of it, which is
Wow, mine melt.
yes. I feel like The key takeaways are really sticking today, so.
See the basic
We've heard it a
facts.
few
that-
times
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
I just want to do a time check.
Our next folks are at 2:30, and I would want to give people a little bit of a break before.
Sure. I'll just finish up real briefly, just current priorities. We talked about the fiber reliability project that is underway. We are working to secure a collaborative data sharing platform with our customer and owners, which we're calling the Vermont Exchange platform. This is basically a common information model. Rather than having multiple programs that all speak different languages, we're building a program that becomes a single source of truth as we are pulling in more data from DERs, from the transmission system, from the distribution system. As things were kind of built separately, they all talk their own language, and we are building software to try to synthesize that so that we all can understand what all those programs are saying. That'll be a really important piece to the puzzle. I think a lot of our neighbors are looking at us like, yes, we've been trying to do that for years, and we're really interested in how Vermont can do that. So that's a project that's underway that's just collaborating with all of the distribution utilities to find the best way to make that work. In addition, we have two transmission projects that I wanted to address today. One is our Franklin County line upgrade project, and the other is our Alliance transmission project. So I'll just go to this next slide, which talks about our Franklin County line upgrade. This is a perfect example of a 1957 vintage line that goes from our Georgia substation to our Highgate substation. It's about 212 poles that have been drying out, and they do not meet our reliability standards for the next 7 years, which is the cycle that we're looking at our transmission poles. And so they need to be replaced. But instead of replacing these poles one for one, we are looking at how we can right size this transmission line. We own the asset. It's already there. The corridor is already there. So rather than in 10 years building another transmission line and having to site new corridor, we're trying to optimize the assets that we have right now, which is this corridor in Franklin County. And essentially what we're trying to do is we can't take this line out of service and do a one-for-one replacement. It's a critical connection for Hydro-Quebec and our Chittenden County, our biggest load center. So instead, we'll have to keep it operating while we build a brand new line right next to it. We're shifting 15 feet to the east on the eastern corridor, and we are going to build what we're calling single steel monopoles that will be a little bit taller. So instead of having 3 phases in the way that we normally have 3 phases, those are the conductors, the lines. It'll be a single pole where you have a phase on one side, a phase on the other side, and the third phase below that first one. And it'll just be a taller steel pole. This will allow us to right size that transmission line to what we need for the future, no regret investment, keep reliability while we're building it. Once it's built, we can then decommission the existing line and take it out of service and take it out of the ground. This slide basically, kind of goes through its benefits, that we are replacing 212 structures with these steel pole structures. It's maintaining the safe operations of the system, increasing reliability. It's increasing the amount of renewable energy that can now be connected in that area, of which right now there is not a lot of capacity to put more renewable energy, site more renewable energy. And the piece here is it's also creating space in the existing corridor for the possibility of a second transmission line, which we feel will be needed for Vermont's electric load growth in the future. And that brings me into our second project, which is the Alliance Transmission Exchange Project. This project is a joint venture with a partner. Their name is Grid United. And essentially it would be building and I should just start with, this is a very preliminary proposal. We're working through what this project would look like, how it would be paid for, how it fits into our grid, how it benefits the regional grid. But it would be a 1,200 megawatt bi-directional project that's in partnership with Hydro-Quebec. So lines bi-directional is kind of the new term of art in terms of, rather than just bringing power in, it's allowing for power to go both ways. And we're seeing that word in all of the big transmission projects that are being proposed in New England right now. The reason why those transmission projects are being proposed in New England, and it's a bit of the railroad wars again in terms of transmission, is because New England has ambitious state policy goals, climate-driven goals. They need to reach their own percentage of renewable energy to meet their growing load. Our request for proposals for states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island have been delivered to essentially say, transmission developers, we need this amount of electric and we want it to be renewable. And we want you to tell us how you can do it. And then we'll select the best project. That's happening at a regional level. There are there's an RFP that's currently out right now that's really being charged by the New England States Committee on Electricity. That's each state coming to the table and saying, we're all going to pay for one transmission line that's going to help the region. That's a big deal right now because we've tried for many years to make that happen, and we could never get all the states at the table to agree on what the cost allocation would be. And this time, the magic in the recipe worked, and everyone's at the table. So Alliance could possibly be a transmission project that helps meet Vermont needs and regional needs. We won't be considered in this first RFP because they've chosen an area that benefits Maine connecting to Boston. But as we know, ISO New England has cited Northwest Vermont as a reliability area that they're paying attention to. This project would be a success for that reliability. It would essentially solve that reliability issue. And it offers, both local, regional, and interregional benefits for their transmission needs. Along with meeting the 2050 transmission study needs, it meets Vermont's asset replacement and upgrade needs that we've identified in this plan. It relieves local congestion in that what we call the SHEI, the Sheffield Highgate Export Interface. I won't go too deep into that, but that's a very constrained area in northern Vermont. If this project were to be built, it would essentially free up space for more renewable energy in Vermont. I'll just pause because I know I've talked a lot and brought a lot of information. There'll be more to come on this project. We're excited to be working with our partner Grid United. They share a lot of the similar values that we do at Velco. And right now we're working with them to see how is this feasible? How do we make this project work for Vermont?
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's a great presentation. I mean, we could talk about this forever.
Yeah.
The energy transition, I should say, it's just fascinating to see. I mean, what would you say is what would you say is the most impactful thing that's happening right now in terms of the next 10 years in the energy transition from transmission perspective?
The most impactful
Is
thing.
it
Yeah. I think the grid enhancing technologies will have a big role right now from Vermont's transmission system and just our load.
Mm-hmm.
Those other gets like the dynamic line ratings, they don't make sense for us right now,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe in the future they do. The smart valve, again, Vermont's like this little, what we call innovation workbench. Because we're so small and we're so connected and we're really good at coordinating with our stakeholders, we're able to do some really cool things in state that other states are, calling and wanting more information. How did you do this? And what does this look like? And so that's an example, this smart valve. Other people are watching how this gets cited, how it performs. We've had grid enhancing technologies on our system for years. We have synchronous condensers, which are, an older model of, a power flow control device. But essentially, this could be a new wave of what utilities will make their standard.
Mm-hmm.
It is new equipment. It's new in new technology, and so we're obviously being thoughtful about how it's used and how we move forward once it does get put in place. But from a transformation perspective, I do think the flexible load management programs, that's really transformational. That's and absolutely the fiber. Yeah.
That's correct.
I was also excited about the data sharing project that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Is that also going to be really important for flexible load management?
That's a great question. I wish I had an answer for you, but I'll get back to you on that. I think there are engineers that are creating that. They'll have a better answer of what the kind of takeaways once it's connected. I know it's going to help grid operators with visibility and being able to make better decisions as we're operating the grid with a more complex grid.
Great. Yeah.
A couple of questions. During all those outages that the distribution utilities had problems with their system failing, did Velco have any issues with all those snowstorms and
Okay.
Weather.
I see what you're saying.
weather?
Yeah, that's a great question. The short answer is no. The transmission system is built in a different way. It can withstand, and also we don't have as much mileage as distribution. So we don't see the impacts as much with those storms. But with our fiber, we do, certainly. And so we have a whole telecom team that's dedicated in our radio program when it's really cold and things start breaking, that are going out and making those repairs to make sure the fiber is connected, that the radio system is working so that first responders in the storm can communicate in emergencies. But yeah, the last, Irene comes to mind because there's this picture of one of our transmission lines that was near a river in Rutland County, the Clarendon River, that just swept our transmission pole right into the river. And the best part about that picture is the fiber holding it all together up out of the water, which is pretty incredible. But we don't see the same impacts as the distribution utilities do.
And is nuclear in any of the equations in the future power?
That's to be determined for New England. The writing on the wall seems that most of our nuclear generating stations have already retired or set dates to retire. It's not something that we are putting in our planning model, as we haven't seen any discussion, particularly for Vermont at least.
You just wonder. On that new alliance one that you're asking about, is that because H2 would like to wheel power through Vermont to Boston, and it looked like those two lines, one was headed toward Boston and one was headed towards Connecticut?
I think that is a benefit for Canada, certainly because of the way Vermont is located. We kind of have a geostrategic position in New England where we're, a lot of jet hydro above us and a lot of load below us. And so we are a bit of a corridor that any developer is looking at. It's the same with There's a project, TDI New England, their Clean Energy Power Link, which would be using Vermont to bring power down to some of those load areas. The difference with this project is we're at the table designing what that project would look like. And so for our side, we're looking for benefits of how this is going to help Vermont, and are there additional upgrades that come about because of this project that help reinforce and strengthen Vermont's system. We're also, you probably saw, I don't know if it's still up there, but you probably saw there was another line over to New York. We're in conversations with New York of, it's each area wants stronger interconnections because they're all dealing with the same challenges that we are. Yeah.
Thanks.
We tax the kilowatts on its way to New York and Boston. Make some money.
Well, we certainly any deal that does get made, we're looking out for Vermont's best interest and making sure that if Falco system is the system that's going to be used to deliver that electric, that Vermont ratepayers are going to benefit from it. So,
All right. Thank you so much. We are back on with Burlington Electric at 2:30. Jack, are they coming in person or are
I
they?
believe it was in person.
Okay. Why don't we go off live?
They're outside.
Oh, they're outside. Great. Let's go off live for just a minute, take a quick break, and then we'll go back.